are these people?
We're gonna get into some funniness with Ezra Klein. No, it's more like with Zei Squirrel. All right. I read this article and I started to chuckle, and I'm like, oh my God. Now,
you read?
This is the Zei Squirrel. I think a lot of people know who Zei Squirrel is. At Zei_Squirrel on Twitter. They're on Telegram. She's on Telegram. She's also has Discord. Very fiery about Israel. But wrote this article about Ezra Klein. And I was like, I remember Ezra Klein, that sweet,
I don't.
Nerdy glasses guy. Well, he was a frequent guest on Rachel Maddow back in the shitlib days when a lot of us were shitlibs. All right, so
Can I go back to not knowing?
He was a frequent egg-headed guest who then was a co-founder of Vox. All right, when Vox launched, this was one of the guys that launched it. Thanks so much for foisting that neoliberal piece of shit on us. And then he, of course, found his natural home with the New York Times because shitlibs of a feather flock together. So he recently did a podcast with Ta-Nehisi Coates. So in his interview, Ezra Klein repeatedly, over and over again, launders the ongoing genocide by blaming Palestinians for it. Naturally, he's a Zionist. He does this through the term agency, his favorite liberal and pseudo-intellectual buzzword used to justify all their genocidal-mania. Like I said, we're going to have some fun. We're going to air this one out. This is the magic of agency. It turns everything into whatever you want while pretending you're making an objective, fair, and reasonable analytical point. Welcome to Democratic, talking speak in 101. It allows you to posture as intellectually honest and serious. That's who Ezra Klein is. He's the paragon of moral virtue, the quintessential New York Times liberal. He determines what's just and unjust for the world today and throughout history. The Ezra Kleins embody virtue. They love to virtue signal. So, are Palestinians being subjected to genocide by Ezra Kleins? Well, that in their moral framework is virtue. That is moral necessity. That is the height of morality itself. Because what? Why? Because agency. A pseudo-intellectual concept I've thoroughly dismantled before. Hamas did it. It's all because of Hamas and the Palestinian resistance. And if it weren't for them and their agency, there wouldn't be a genocide right now. And you couldn't possibly deny agency, so you should all agree that the genocide is actually moral and good and civilized, right? Here's the problem, Ezra. Jews had agency under Nazi Germany, by that definition. You can't deny that. In fact, they had more agency in Weimar Germany leading up to Nazi rule than Palestinians have ever had under Israeli genocidal apartheid. There were Jewish ministers in government, like Rudolf Hilferding. Jews were leading political figures in major political parties, like the Social Democrats, which were governing parties. The Weimar Constitution itself was drafted by Jewish lawyer Hugo Preuss. Leading scientists and scholars at the top German universities included Jews like Einstein, I've heard of him, and Husserl, right? There was a ton of agency here, right, Ezra? And yet Hitler rose to power. The Nazis took control and instituted anti-Semitic policies that eventually led to the Holocaust. So, by your logic, then, the logic you apply to Palestinians who dare resist their genocide, their occupation, their apartheid, you ascribe such great power to agency that you make it the casual element behind their destruction. By that standard, then, and this might get me in trouble some places, Jews in Nazi Germany caused their own genocide. Jews in Weimar had significant agency. There were Jews in the Soviet Union, right? There were Jews in the Soviet Union in top positions with agency, right? Jews in the U.S. had agency, and by your framework, that agency must have casually influenced the rise of the Nazi movement and the broader views of the German public. You can't deny all that. You can't deny all that agency. That's a part of reality, right, Ezra? Oh, I said we're going to air this one out. And this is very tongue-in-cheek, but surely it must have played a role in shaping Nazi ideology, just as you claim Palestinian resistance is responsible for Israeli genocide. The Nazis had a significant portion of the German public believed that Jews wielded their agency in nefarious ways. This mirrors the Israeli Zionist perspective, which holds that Palestinians are subhuman and that their mere resistance justifies extermination, on top of the fact that they accuse them of lying about all of the atrocities that are being committed against them. Yet Ezra refuses to analyze these claims historically. In fact, he explicitly told Ta-Nehisi Coates that we shouldn't, that we must engage only with feelings and lived experiences, which are raw and impervious to real history and facts and objective reality. Now feelings are more important than facts. It's very interesting. We must accept the genocidal Zionist Israeli perspective as the universal reality. Because agency, that is the Israeli agency, which we are also not allowed to deny. So why do you not extend that logic to the Nazis and to their lived experiences with Jews? The Nazis also had agency. This is the hard, like, again, I can't even say, like, as a Jewish guy, it hurts to even say this, but it's so embarrassing that Ezra would position himself that he would be criticized like this. It's got to be done. The German public that supported the Nazi movement had agency. They had lived experiences, which, by your own logic, should be considered separate from historical analysis and objective reality, just as you insist we do for Israel's genocide. I mean, my head is hurting here.
Is it?
A little bit. So let's set aside history for a moment, as you demand we do for your precious Israeli death and rape cult. Allegedly, but not allegedly. Let's apply your own logic to Nazi Germany, which murdered your people, Ezra. And when we do, we must conclude by necessity, as dictated by our acceptance of agency, that the Jews were responsible for their own genocide, much more so than Palestinians could be, given their comparatively lower level of agency leading up to and after the Nakba. Anyone who says this is a moral monster. They're a Nazi. This is literally what Nazis say, except they didn't have the pseudo-intellectual, incoherent term agency to launder it. How convenient. Do you see what this liberal Zionist moral universe actually consists of when you apply it universally rather than just to their precious genocidal Israel death and rape cult? When you turn it back on them? It's literal Nazism. It's pure, unfiltered Nazism. I don't even know what that means, but okay, Squirrel. And yes, it is true. Ezra Klein, the good liberal at the New York Times, along with Noah Smith, Matthew Iglesias, Jeffrey Goldberg, all these good liberal Zionists are modern-day Nazis. And they rule over the U.S. NATO-Israeli empire, the Fourth Reich. That is the reality of our situation. At least from the Squirrel's perspective, which I agree with, by the way. To be clear, everything Ezra Klein says in that interview is a brazen, shameless lie. He paints the Palestinian resistance, including Hamas, as a rabid, irrational, subhuman beast purely out for death and destruction. He inverts reality to launder Zionism as detailed in this thread, which includes a detailed overview by Coulter Lurwers of the many times Hamas has offered a diplomatic resolution by including laying down their arms, which has been repeatedly refused by Israel.
In recent weeks, the Joe Biden administration has claimed that once the current crisis in Gaza is over, it's going to revive, quote unquote, concerted efforts at establishing a two-state resolution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's been all the more vehement, however, that there is no place for Hamas in this two-state settlement.
Can't even say it right.
You know, the argument, Hamas is committed to destroying the state of Israel, therefore Hamas itself must be destroyed. Therefore, the genocide in Gaza must continue if we ever want to see any peace in the region. Claims like this, blaming the Palestinian leadership for the Israel-Palestine conflict's infamous intractability, are of course not new. Decades ago, the Israeli foreign minister, Abba Eban, claimed that, quote, the Palestinian leadership has never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity for peace. Now, as my chapter in Deluge attempts to demonstrate, the main problem with this claim is that it's completely contradicted by the factual record. In reality, both the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and then after it Hamas, have, with varying degrees of clarity, endorsed a two-state resolution to the conflict, whereas Israel, of course backed unilaterally by the United States, has persistently rejected such a resolution in favor of territorial expansion, and has in fact resorted often to very bloody military assaults in order to derail the threat of Palestinian peace offensives. If you take the PLO, in the aftermath of the June 1967 war, the PLO initially rejected recognition of Israel for perfectly understandable reasons. They did not want to accept a state that had been established on 78% of historic Palestine via the dispossession and displacement of the indigenous Palestinian people. And yet, from the early 1970s, particularly after the October 1973 war, Yasser Arafat and the core Palestinian leadership recognized that legitimizing Palestinian claims in the eyes of the international community would necessitate the pragmatic step of recognizing Israel. And already in January of 1976, the PLO offered to do just that at the United Nations Security Council. Predictably, the United States reacted by vetoing the resolution. Israel, for its part, refused to take part in the Security Council deliberations and carried out airstrikes in Lebanon against Palestinian refugees, killing dozens.
Like you
and
do.
As this pattern of Israeli behavior became more and more manifest in the late 1970s, American officials came to observe that Israeli strikes in South Lebanon had very little to do with the supposed threat of Palestinian terror, and in fact everything to do with attempting to batter the Palestinians out of their moderation and back into extremism. The apex of this strategy was, of course, the June 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, in which, for fear of the fact that the Palestine Liberation Organization had accepted a ceasefire and scrupulously adhered to it for over a year, and
they attacked the army barracks.
Was advocating negotiations once again. Israel steamrolled
in the
into
airports,
Lebanon, killing 15,000 to 20,000 Palestinians and Lebanese.
I love how he just glosses over that.
25 years.
Wait a minute.
And Israel
just killed 15 to 20,000 Lebanese. Like, it's just accepted.
Yep.
And
today, or not today, but in 2006 and after, carried out the exact same plague book in relation to its to the threat of Hamas peace offensives. Elected in January 2006 on a reform platform, Hamas very quickly signaled to Washington that it was willing to abandon its notorious 1988 charter and to integrate itself into negotiations aimed at a two-state settlement. The crucial point is this: in the 15 years since, neither Washington or Tel Aviv has ever once so much as indicated that it would be willing to test that Hamas offer. To the contrary, they immediately moved to punish the Hamas leadership and the people of Gaza through that vile and illegal blockade. When Hamas threatened to break with its assigned role as a rejectionist terrorist group and sought to integrate itself into negotiations, Israel furthermore fell back upon its age-old method, massive resort to military violence. And as Norman has documented in insane detail, it carried out military operations in 2006, in 2008, in 2012, and 2014, in virtually every case aimed, at least in part, at derailing Palestinian peace initiatives. And so, when the question is raised how can Israel coexist with Hamas when it refuses to engage in diplomatic activity or refuses to recognize Israel? The simple answer is that Hamas tried. It tried that for 15 years. And every avenue it sought to go down, it was blocked by American and Israeli power. And as I write in the chapter, the bottom line is this, that were it not for the fact that Israel not only missed, but actively spurned and sabotaged every Palestinian peace offer. Those crimes committed on October 7th and the much greater crime that is ongoing, that Israeli genocide in Gaza, would never have happened. They would never have happened because the Israel-Palestine conflict would have long been resolved.
Damn. Damn. That was impressive. Damn! That's Coulter lore worse, okay? Lower worse. So the same offer was again made last year and was once again dismissed by everyone, including genocidal Zionists like Ezra Klein. What a surprise. Again,
Of course.
Hamas willing to lay down its arms. This is the Associated Press almost a year ago, last April. Top Hamas political official told the AP they are willing to agree to a truce of 5 years or more that would lay down its weapons and convert it into a political party if an independent Palestinian state is established along pre-67 borders, which Israel will never allow. The Ezra Kleins of the world will ignore all this and instead hysterically shout, "How dare they resist my Zionist genocide and occupation? How dare they respond to decades of Zionists like me, mass raping, maiming, and killing their babies, children, women, and men by retaliating in kind?" And to such a marginal, right, to such marginal extent that when you compare casualty figures to our mass killing sprees, their response is barely visible. No, that's not how it works. We kill, we rape, we maim. We throw your babies into ovens and then fabricate hoaxes to launder our crimes, making it part of our wedding rituals to take photos of these babies and stab them with knives. Oh, God. I don't know. I'm going to regret this. The baby who was burned alive is now part of depraved Israeli marriage rituals where they take photos of him and stab it as a symbol for all Palestinian babies they want to burn and kill. Oh my God. Nope. Wow. Brah. Yeah, brah is right. All right. That threat only gets worse, by the way. That's what we, Ezra Kleins, Matthew Iglesias, and Noah Smiths do to you. And you dare respond? You dare think you are human and allowed to even consider resisting as we occupy, genocide, and rape you to death? Now, Ezra Klein is not doing that. However, Ezra Klein is full-throated supporting the people who are, which is just as bad, if not worse, because he doesn't have the balls to do it himself. He's relying on them to do it and then turning around and trying to justify their animalistic behavior. No, that's not how the Zionist Nazi universe works. They are human, you are subhuman. At one point, Ezra Klein claims that Hamas is worse than Netanyahu. You can only say this if you are a Zionist ethnic supremacist who believes Palestinians, Lebanese, and Yemenis are subhuman. Hundreds of thousands maimed, burned alive, tortured, and raped to death. They're all nothing to Ezra Klein compared to the Palestinian resistance daring to resist occupation, genocide, and apartheid, which they're legally allowed to do. Remember, we got the shirt. When people are occupied, resistance is justified. We got a t-shirt and a sticker. Go get it. IndieNews.shop. At another point, Ezra Klein, at another point, Ezra asserts that Hamas knew what Operation Al-Aqsa Flood would cause, namely the mass murder and rape of their people, because everyone supposedly knows how genocidal and depraved the Ezra Kleins of the world are, or at least the Ben-Gvirs, the Gallants, and the Netanyahus. And by proxy, Ezra Klein. See, he uses them as a proxy. He denounces them. They're the bad ones. But they're not really the bad ones because he's completely fine with what they're doing. Or at least they should know, solely when it benefits the Hasbro propaganda line that launders genocide by blaming it on Hamas and their so-called agency, a variation of the classic and depraved human shields trope. But by that logic, Ezra Klein and Zionists should have known that their occupation, occupied and genocide of Palestinians for a century, would lead to Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Ergo, they are morally absolved completely.
Ergo Proctor Hawk?
Basically, post-Proctor Hawk. Especially since every Israeli is actually, by definition, a human shield. But again, Ezra Klein can't even comprehend applying this as a universal standard because he is a Zionist. And as Squirrel says, he's a Zionist Nazi. He believes he and his people, and by his people, he solely means Zionist Jews. He doesn't. He also means Zionist Christians, are superior to all other forms of life on this planet, and that they maim, rape, and kill are subhuman. I don't think he really truly believes that. Squirrel is accusing him of that. These are the genocidal Zionist liberal scum who run the liberal New York Times, CNN, AP, Reuters, Guardian, and Washington Post. Finally, another genocide laundering lie Ezra Klein constantly repeats is that interview is this myth of a good, virtuous, liberal left Israel with sincere peace seekers who were thwarted by the evil of Hamas and Palestinian resistance in the 90s, forcing them to become genocidal. Hamas didn't even exist until 2006, but that's a whole other thing. This is yet another brazen, shameless lie the genocidal Zionists like Ezra Klein have fabricated and spread to launder their own sadistic, pathological bloodlust and project it onto those they occupy, rape, and murder. Sick. Israel has been a death cult that has resolutely opposed any peace deal in favor of continuing its occupation, apartheid, and genocide, as detailed by Norman Finkelstein and Mika's dad, Mr. Berzinski, of all people. All right? Oh, with Mika and Morning Joe, which I'm not going to play because fuck them. But I will play the Finkelstein piece because I think this is important, even though fuck democracy now.
Israel was the only country in the world, the only one, which had legalized torture from 1987 to 1999. The record on torture, on house demolitions, and targeted...
1999 is when we came to office.
I wish that were... I wish that were the saving grace, but the fact of the matter is, being faithful to the historical record, the record of labor has been much worse on human rights violations than the record of Likud. It's a fact that the only Israeli government during the period from 1967 to the present which temporarily suspended torture was Begin from 1979 to 1981. On the record of house demolitions, Mr. Rabin used to boast that he demolished many more homes than any Likud government. Even on the record of settlements, as Dr. Ben-Ami well knows, the record of Rabin was worse in terms of settlement expansion than the record of Yitzhak Shamir. And, a fact he leaves out in the book, the record of Barak on housing startups in the occupied territories.
Building more houses.
Yeah, was worse than the record of Netanyahu. It's a paradox for, I'm sure, American listeners, but the record on human rights, an abysmal record in general, and in particular, the worst record is the record of labor, not Likud.
Which is also really interesting. And Norman's a legend. Again, we talked about Norman when he had the Beitar terrorist pager attack happen to him a few weeks ago. Don't always agree with him, but he has been really good basically since October 8th, 2023. He's been a leader. He's been an outspoken voice. And, you know, he had a lot of questionable takes on COVID and other stuff, but he's been 100% spot on here. I didn't like when he said that Rafa, and I remember a while back he said Gaza is completely gone. I disagree with that, at least now. I sure as hell hope that isn't going to be the case. And we're still fighting to make that not a reality. We're definitely losing it, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a minute. But, you know, shitting on Ezra Klein is certainly not going to help YouTube. Maybe they'll like that because it's some kind of conflict. I don't know. Thank you to everyone who's here. But if you're able to, because we are demonetized on INN, we ask you to not give money to the platforms anyway. We'd rather not have to pay the fees. So Cash App, $ Indie News Network, ko-fi.com/Indie News Network, paypal.me/Indie News Network are the best ways to support the channel. And you can also subscribe monthly or annually or even free at INNnewsletter.com, where 6 to 7 days a week, you'll get a daily update of all of the live streams, the clips that are published, the articles, any simulcasts, and then a weekly update on Friday night. There are podcasts. I've now started making Boats Smashing Into Other Boats, a podcast that will be published on Thursdays. Our one-on-ones are being published over there. So there's a lot to subscribe to over at INNnewsletter.com. Please do that. Again,
coming to a Substack newsletter near you.
I'd rather you did that actually for free, and then support us over at Ko-fi and PayPal and Cash App. Those are the best ways to do that. That's been the formula, and it works great for us and for you. And thank you so much to all who do it. Support independent media, kids. We need it more than ever. Love you all.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Mwah. Ciao, baby.
No! We just fucking lost the stream!
Can't keep giving us nothing and think we're bluffing about coming for your heads. Why play civil if you won't listen to 50,000 dead? And now we know our mission, we form a militia, make Congress a prison. No, I play civil when all these dead won't make you listen. What's more American than slaying your oppressors? What's more American than liberty or death first? God, I thought we were founded on abolishing the tyranny of those who would starve a village all to live empirically. And I regret that I have only one life to give for my cause now that I can see the cause so clearly. See, I want our leaders, regardless of party, to fear me.